welcome to the USA Today Tech Podcast for the week of October 10th. I'm Laura Mandero, and I'm here with Nancy Blair and Marco Della Cava and Jessica Gwynn. And she has done a story with some exclusive data about a big wage gap between Blacks and Hispanics and whites in Silicon Valley and in the high-tech industry. We were the ones who got this data. Jessica, tell us who was doing this research? Why hadn't anybody reported about it? And what seems to be surprising?
The research was done by the American Institute for Economic Research as part of a broader look at H-1B visas. And the researcher contacted USA Today because of our extensive coverage and interest in high-tech diversity to let us know that she had discovered that Asians, Blacks, and Hispanics in particular were suffering from a pretty significant wage gap in skilled positions in Silicon Valley. And we had been searching for this kind of research data for a long time, so we spent a lot of time with the researcher going through that data. She actually crunched some additional information for us so that we could give people a much better sense of what kind of numbers we're talking about. But for Hispanics, it's, $16,000 less a year than their non-Hispanic counterparts. And to give some perspective, that's the difference between someone who has a college degree and someone who does not.
And so, I think the interesting part of your story, of course, you talked to somebody, a Hispanic engineer, a woman, about this issue. And then you talked to some other people who hypothesize why this is the case. And you talk about sort of an unconscious bias phenomenon. What is that? It seems to be a fairly new but important subject.
Right, and a lot of technology companies now are conducting unconscious bias training. And essentially it's white managers who are unaware that they are judging people in the same positions, performing the same tasks, receiving the same kinds of performance evaluations differently when it comes to pay and promotions. And so companies in Silicon Valley are taking this very seriously. They're taking a hard look at it and are trying to make sure that they can bring a little bit more accountability and transparency to the ways in which they're handing out bonuses or giving pay raises, because the differences here are so stark.
And I noticed that you have almost 1,000 Facebook likes. This is about as we're recording this, about 24 hours after the story went up. Do you have any feedback in particular?
I think that this has really sent some shockwaves through Silicon Valley. People have responded and say, "Oh, big shocker, we already knew that." But when you put numbers on something, it becomes real to people. And I think companies read this story and realize they have a big problem and they need to do something about it.
Right, and there's a big chart. And this is part of the Inequity in Silicon Valley series that's been going on for a couple months. We've got more coming out in the next couple weeks, I understand.
Yes. We have a big story coming out, written principally by Beth Weiss, looking at the gap between computer science graduates from prestigious universities and those who are getting hired in Silicon Valley. And the companies have always said that this is a pipeline issue. We hire anyone who is qualified, regardless of race or ethnicity. But the numbers that Beth crunched seem to indicate that there may be other issues at play here.
Okay, and so talking about the system, let's talk about the big news headline of the end of the week, and that was Satya Nadella's comments. He was speaking at a computing conference for women in Phoenix, and he said something. Nancy, just give us a little recap of what he said, what struck people as so wrong.
Yes, well, after spending quite a few minutes extolling the great work that a lot of very high-level Microsoft female women executives are doing right now for the company, he found himself talking about salary and advancements, and he was going back over a theme that he had used earlier in this interview, talking about karma and superpowers, but unfortunately he got off track in a way that made him sound tone deaf, to say the least, saying that women. The question was about advancement and pay, and his response was that women should trust in karma for proper compensation, and that in fact caused not a groan from the audience, but the woman who was interviewing him stopped him and said, "No, I must disagree with you on this." Satya, this is a woman, the president of Harvey Mudd College, who is in fact on the Microsoft board and has had a long-standing relationship with him.
Yeah, and so I mean, he was asked pretty straightforward question: if a woman is uncomfortable asking for a raise, what do you think she should do? And he said, well, basically, just trust in the system, and you'll actually incur good karma if you don't ask for the raise. And he quickly, this was happening late Thursday. We were covering this. He quickly backtracked, first via Twitter, calling his remarks inarticulate, and then with a longer memo to employees, going even further, not just inarticulate, but completely wrong, and told everybody, actually listen to what she said as an answer, which was very practical advice, if you were to listen to the clip, which we embedded in our stories. And then the fall continued. We have a story on the site from Beth Weiss today. A lot of directors of women in business organizations wanted to talk about this today. Anything stand out in terms of what they wanted to say?
Well, it seemed to be, obviously continuing to call him on it and call him out on it. Some of the more nuanced responses said, in fact, he may have been talking more broadly about sort of what he called the long-term inefficiency of any HR system, the short-term inefficiency and the longer-term efficiency. But the Twitter course and a lot of the responses that we saw come out today were that, no, women must be their own advocates for their own careers and speak up and educate themselves on pay parity and pay equity in order to get the compensation for doing the same job as their male counterparts.
Marco, you've been talking to a lot of high-profile people in Silicon Valley over the last couple of weeks. I mean, certainly the subject of women and pay and a gap is nothing new, but I mean, do you think there's sort of a new awakening or a new focus, and not just for women, but for also minorities? Maybe because new studies have come out, or people like Sheryl Sandberg are making it more high profile?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in fact, I've recently been with high profile executives who are women and one who's African American. The woman in question essentially said something we've heard before, which is that it's a supply chain problem. We would be happy to hire more women and minorities if there were more of them with the requisite skills for Silicon Valley. The African American executive I spoke with, sort of very experienced in the tech world, basically said we need to do better than that. Obviously, there is an issue of training at the lower levels in order to make people sort of prepared. But he was eager to point out to me that a good number of jobs, more than half, at any company you want to mention, he said, sort of whether it's Facebook or Twitter, are non-technical jobs. So his point was, just sort of laying it on people who don't have the right skills isn't really the right answer. But I think overall, your initial point's an accurate one. People are talking about this a lot more. Companies are either volunteering their diversity numbers or being sort of coerced by their peers to release them. And I think we're starting to see some momentum on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was out doing some interviews as well for a sort of an ongoing package for diversity in inequality in Silicon Valley. And I think there's this trope that there's not enough of the population to support these jobs. But I think the other side of it, which you're hearing more vividly, is that there are these people you just might have to work a little bit harder because they might not be in your network because you're not black or you're not a woman, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, and so you have to kind of reach out to the organizations that support them.
And a point that I hear over and over again is that obviously a more diverse company is a better reflection of the people you're trying to sell to. Mm-hmm. So if your company's not diverse, it's actually going to hurt the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see if, I would like to see in a year or two if we get these same diversity reports, if there's any change. So
yeah, that'll be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, people say, okay, now we're talking about it, but it's really doing something. That's the where the pudding is. Okay, so a lot of social issues certainly making the headlines, but there's some product stuff coming out. Next week, we've got an Apple iPad event on October 16th. This is not supposed to be as big a deal as the iPhone event, sort of from Apple's mouth, but, what are we going to be talking about next week?
Yeah, I think it's a smaller venue, more intimate reveal. The expectation is that they will launch whatever the next iteration of the iPad Air will be. There's some talk that they might come up with an even larger screen on an iPad. They will absolutely show off the latest update in the operating system for their Mac computers, OS X Yosemite, which will have one of the big features there is this thing they call continuity, where you'll be able to do something on your Mac and carry it over to your phone and to your iPad, be that working on a document or even taking a phone call on your computer, or transferring a text back and forth. Mm-hmm. So those are the big expectations heading in.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's also artfully staged in that you had the big news out of Apple with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, and of course the forthcoming watch. And I think this is a way of keeping the spotlight on Apple, sort of staging these releases. The next thing probably will be the actual launch of the watch itself at some point early in the next year.
Right. So it's tiring for tech journalists, but sort of good news for the Apple brand, it sounds like, in the headlines. And I'm reading a story from Jefferson Graham from Wednesday, also talking about the launch of Yosemite. That's a new operating system upgrade for Macs. And possibly this is kind of interesting since I've been using a Retina screen, this really high definition screen for desktop Macs. So that's something else we might see next week. There's some earnings, I guess. We'll get Google and Intel and eBay. A lot of eBay headlines with Mark Andreessen and Carl Icahn kind of slinging some mud recently. But also some exclusives coming up. Marco, you've just been talking to venture capitalist Peter Thiel.
Yes, just visited with him. He's often very outspoken on all manner of topics. Recently said that Apple was a quote, bet against innovation. He has high praise for Tim Cook, but feels the company's grown too large to really innovate in a huge way the way it once did. He's also very suspect of people who decide to go to business school, and has his reasons for why. It has to do with lemmings and sheep. And just an overall interesting conversation with a guy who has picked some right horses over the years. Notably, he, besides starting PayPal with Max Levchin and Elon Musk, he also was the first outside investor in Facebook. So he's done okay.
Okay. All right. And one thing we didn't see, just to wrap up, was a driverless car at a Tesla. In fact, that company's stock pretty much got hammered along with the rest of the stock market today. I know, Marco, you've been writing a little bit about driverless and new car technology, so we're just going to have to keep waiting for that.
Yeah, I think I think Elon is brilliant in so many ways. I think this was a little bit premature. Obviously, the four-wheel drive announcement today in the Model S is sort of a foreshadowing of their next model, the Model X, which is a four-wheel drive, sort of almost an SUV kind of car. So sort of getting that technology in the current model. But as far as driverless cars go, you don't want that until it's totally baked.
Right. Okay. All right. That's it for Tech Podcast this week. There's going to be a lot of tech news next week, so be sure to listen in and also check out Graham and Bay, also on SoundCloud.